The notification on Liam's phone was as quiet and brutal as a blade in the dark. He was standing at the counter of a small cafe, the smell of roasted coffee beans and steamed milk a comforting blanket against the morning's chill. He'd ordered his usual, a simple black Americano, a small ritual of normalcy in a life that felt increasingly theatrical. When he tapped his card, the machine beeped with an aggressive finality. Declined. He tried again. Same result. The barista, a young man with kind eyes, looked at him with a practiced neutrality that was somehow worse than pity. "Sorry, man. It's not going through," the barista said, already turning to the next customer. Liam stepped aside, a flush of heat rising on his neck, not from embarrassment, but from a cold, crystallizing certainty. He pulled out his phone. The banking app, usually so welcoming with its clean interface and healthy balance, presented a single stark message over a grayed-out screen. Access denied. Your privileges for this joint account have been revoked by the primary account holder. He didn't feel panic. He didn't feel the hot surge of anger he might have expected. Instead, a profound and weary calm settled over him, the kind of calm that comes when a thing you have long anticipated has finally happened. He knew with absolute precision who the primary account holder was and why she had done it, Clara, his wife. This wasn't a banking error. This was a declaration, a power play, the culmination of months, no, years, of subtle dismissals and overt condescension from her and her family. They believed this account, the one that held the salary from his modest architectural consulting job, was his lifeline. They thought that by cutting it, they had cut his legs out from under him. He was, in their eyes, a ship severed from its only anchor, set adrift in a sea of their magnificent generosity. Liam looked at the screen again, at the words meant to humiliate and control him. A slow, sad smile touched his lips, a private irony that no one else in the bustling cafe could possibly understand. He thought of the other accounts, the ones not in this app, the ones not connected to this life he had so carefully curated, the ones that held the true measure of his work, the silent, sprawling fortune he had built while playing the part of the struggling, unambitious husband. Claire had locked him out of the birdcage, forgetting he had built the aviary it sat in. This act, meant to be the checkmate, was merely the opening move of a game they didn't even know they were playing. Within a month, their entire world, the opulent, glittering facade they worshipped, would crumble to dust, and he would be the one holding the demolition papers. It's funny, isn't it, how people can look at the same thing and see completely different realities. They saw a man who needed them. I saw a family balanced on a foundation I had built, a foundation they were determined to smash with their own hubris. Have you ever been in a situation where someone completely underestimated you, where you had to just sit and wait for the right moment to show them the truth? Let me know down in the comments where you're watching from, because this story of underestimation spans cities and boardrooms, but it starts, as so many do, in a place that's supposed to be safe, the family dinner table. Subscribe and like the video, because you're going to want to see how this ends. The lockout had been preceded, 48 hours earlier, by what his mother-in-law, Eleanor, called a spontaneous family get-together. In the vocabulary of the Maxwell family, spontaneous meant it had been planned with less than a week's notice, a whirlwind of logistics that still managed to result in a 5-course meal served on china that cost more than Liam's first car. He had driven to their palatial home on the city's outskirts, a monument of white columns and sprawling lawns that screamed new money, with the desperate conviction of someone terrified of being mistaken for anything else. Clara was already there, having arrived earlier with her mother. She greeted him at the door, planting a kiss somewhere in the vicinity of his cheek. It was a gesture so practiced and devoid of warmth, it felt like a transaction. "You're late, Liam," she said, her voice a soft reprimand. She was beautiful, dressed in a silk blouse the color of champagne, her hair perfectly styled. But her beauty, which had once seemed vibrant and alive to him, now felt like a part of the house's decor, expensive, immaculate, and cold to the touch. "Traffic was heavy," he replied, a simple truth that sounded like an excuse in the grand foyer. He carried a bottle of wine, a respectable vintage he'd chosen carefully. Eleanor emerged from the living room, her eyes sweeping over him, from his simple, well-made shoes to his dark blazer. Her smile was a thin, perfect line. Liam, darling, so good of you to make it, she said, taking the wine from him and handing it to a housekeeper without a second glance. We'll save this for the kitchen staff. The dismissal was swift, effortless, a flick of the wrist that defined his place in her world. He was not quite family, not quite staff, but an inconvenient appendage to her daughter. The true guest of honor was Richard, his father-in-law, a man who moved through his own home as if he were a visiting monarch. He was holding court in the living room, a heavy crystal tumbler of scotch in his hand, his voice booming. He was recounting a story about a recent business deal, a narrative polished to a high sheen, starring himself as the brilliant, ruthless negotiator. Marcus, Clara's younger brother, was his sycophantic audience, laughing on cue. Marcus was a softer, less successful version of his father, possessing all of Richard's arrogance but none of his drive. Liam, there you are, Richard bellowed, turning his attention to him. It was not a welcome, it was an interruption. Grab a drink, try to keep up. Liam simply nodded, declining the offered scotch. He sat in a wingback chair slightly outside the main circle, a position he found himself in often at these gatherings. He was an observer, a silent auditor of their lives. He listened as Richard pontificated about the market, about the weakness of his competitors, about the unassailable strength of Maxwell Industries. It was a performance of dominance, and Liam was the designated audience meant to be impressed, or more accurately, intimidated. Clara sat beside her father, her expression rapt. She looked at Richard with a kind of reverence, the same look she used to give Liam years ago, when she thought his quiet confidence was a sign of hidden depths, not, as she now believed, a lack of ambition. The foundation of their life together had shifted so slowly, he hadn't noticed until the cracks were too wide to ignore. He was an architect. He knew that a building with a faulty foundation, no matter how beautiful its facade, was already a ruin. He was just waiting for the storm that would prove it. The dinner was an exercise in theatrical condescension. They were seated around a massive mahogany table that could have comfortably hosted 20. Tonight it was just the 5 of them, the space between them amplifying the emotional distance. The conversation, steered by Richard, was a relentless catalog of their successes and acquisitions. The new yacht, the summer trip to Monaco, the painter they had commissioned for a family portrait. Each topic was a carefully polished stone thrown into the quiet pool of Liam's perceived inadequacy. He ate methodically, his movements precise. He complimented the food, a gesture of politeness that was met with a dismissive wave from Eleanor. Our chef is a true artist, she said, as if Liam had complimented the quality of the air. He trained in Lyon. It's simply what one expects. The true assault began over dessert, a deconstructed tiramisu served in a martini glass. Richard leaned back, swirling the brandy in his snifter. He fixed his gaze on Liam, a predator singling out his prey. Clara was telling me about your finances, he began, the statement landing with calculated weight. Liam felt Clara stiffen beside him. She wouldn't meet his eyes. He placed his fork down gently, his hands resting in his lap. He remained perfectly still. Oh, he said, his voice neutral. She's concerned, Richard continued, enjoying his power. This joint account of yours, it seems a little disorganized, unfocused. A man in your position, Liam, needs to have a firmer grip. But then, I suppose, your income is variable. The insult was layered, a masterclass in passive aggression. It simultaneously belittled his profession, questioned his competence as a man, and painted Clara as a victim of his financial instability. My income is consistent, Liam stated, the words simple and true. Marcus snorted into his napkin. Consistent but small, right? Don't worry, Liam. We'll make sure Clara's taken care of. This was the moment, the pivot. Clara had a choice. She could defend him, create a boundary, assert their partnership, or she could align herself with them. Liam watched her, his heart beating a slow, heavy rhythm. He saw the conflict in her eyes, a fleeting shadow of the woman he had married. Then it was gone, replaced by the familiar sheen of familial loyalty. She reached out and placed her hand on her father's arm. Daddy's right, Liam, she said, her voice soft, betraying him with a gentle tone. I think it's best if I take the lead on our finances from now on, just until your architecture projects become a bit more substantial. It's just more practical. Practical? The word hung in the air. It was the sterile, blameless term. she used to justify her capitulation. It wasn't a betrayal, it was just practical. It wasn't a vote of no confidence, it was just practical. Liam looked from her face to her father's, then to her mother's and brother's. He saw the same expression on all of them, a smug, unified satisfaction. They had won. They had brought his wife fully into their fold, severing her from him. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply nodded, a gesture of quiet acquiescence that they misinterpreted as defeat. "If that's what you think is best, Clara," he said. Inside, something cold and hard settled into place. And hard, a decision. He had tried to protect their marriage from the corrosive influence of his wealth, building a small, walled garden for them to live in, separate from the vast estate of his success. But they hadn't wanted a garden. They wanted the entire estate, and they were willing to tear him down to get it. He felt for the thin leather portfolio case he'd brought with him, resting against the leg of his chair. It was a habit, carrying it with him. It contained the preliminary sketches for his current project, but it also contained other things, documents, proof. It was a physical anchor to his real life, a silent testament to the truth they refused to see. He touched the worn leather, the sensation grounding him. They thought they were taking control. They had no idea he owned the ground beneath their feet. The meal concluded, and as he stood to leave, Richard clapped him on the shoulder, a gesture of magnanimous victory. "Don't you worry, son," he said. The word son a final patronizing twist of the knife. "We'll look after her." Liam met his father-in-law's gaze. For the first time all night, he let a sliver of his true self show, a flicker of something hard and unyielding in his eyes. It was gone in an instant, but it was enough to make Richard's smile falter for a second. Liam said nothing. He just smiled his quiet, unreadable smile and walked out into the night. The decision to lock him out of the account had been made in that dining room. He was simply waiting for the execution. The humiliation, however, was not yet complete. Richard, having secured Clara's allegiance, seemed determined to cement his victory by grinding Liam's face in it. He refilled his brandy and gestured expansively. "Speaking of substantial projects," he boomed, "Maxwell Industries is about to close the deal of the decade. We're breaking ground on a new corporate headquarters downtown, a real landmark." Eleanor beamed. "Richard is being modest. It's going to be the most prestigious address in the city. We're calling it the Phoenix Tower." "Catchy, isn't it?" Marcus added, leaning forward with an air of self-importance, as if he had contributed anything more than enthusiastic agreement. "Represents the city rising from its economic ashes, with us leading the charge." Richard waved a dismissive hand, though he was clearly pleased with the analogy. He turned his gaze back to Liam, his eyes glittering with malicious glee. "It's a different league, you understand?" he said, his tone a blend of feigned sympathy and open condescension. "We're in talks with firms like Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill, Foster and Partners, the big guns. Not," he added with a slight cruel smile, "the sort of thing you'd be involved with. This isn't about drawing up a kitchen extension for some suburban dentist." The table fell silent. The insult was so direct, so brutal, that even Eleanor seemed to think it was a step too far. Clara shifted uncomfortably in her seat, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. But again, she said nothing. Her silence was a resounding endorsement. Liam, however, did not flinch. The calm that had enveloped him earlier deepened, becoming a shield of impenetrable stillness. He had designed kitchen extensions. He had designed single-family homes and small community centers early in his career. He was proud of that work. It was honest. It served people. But Richard's caricature of his career was so wildly inaccurate, so pathetically misinformed, that it was almost amusing. He thought of the models in his private studio, the blueprints for airports, museums, and, yes, skyscrapers that bore his signature. A signature he kept carefully hidden behind the shield of a boutique, almost anonymous firm. Instead of getting angry, he felt a surge of professional curiosity. He leaned forward slightly, his first sign of genuine engagement all evening. "The Phoenix Tower," he mused, as if tasting the name. "That's the plot on the corner of Meridian and 4th, correct? Overlooking the river." Richard looked momentarily surprised that Liam knew the location. "That's the one. Prime real estate. It's a challenging site, Liam continued, his voice even and analytical. The substrate is largely reclaimed marshland. Your foundation will require unusually deep caissons, probably down to the bedrock, which is nearly 200 feet at that point. And with the prevailing wind shear coming off the water, the torsional stress on a building of that proposed height will be immense. Have your engineers considered a tuned mass damper or a reinforced concrete core to counteract the oscillation? The torrent of technical detail silenced the table more effectively than any outburst could have. Richard stared at him, his mouth slightly agape. He had expected a wounded retreat, not a precise clinical dissection of his vanity project's core engineering challenges. He, of course, understood none of it. He was a man of deals and handshakes, not of physics and material science. Our engineers are the best in the world, Richard finally stammered, recovering his bluster. They have it all under control. It's technical jargon, Liam. Best leave it to the professionals. Of course, Liam said, leaning back in his chair. He had made his point, not to them, but to himself. He had held up a small mirror to Richard's ignorance, and the reflection had clearly unnerved him. He picked up his water glass and took a slow sip, but the final turn of the screw was yet to come. As the evening wound down, Eleanor brought up their upcoming family holiday. We've finally booked the villa in Tuscany for September, she announced. 3 weeks. The pictures are just divine. There's an infinity pool overlooking the vineyards. I'm taking the whole month off, Marcus chimed in. I need a break. From what, Liam wondered, was never specified. They discussed flights, side trips to Florence, and wine tours. Their conversation a tight exclusionary circle. Liam was not included, not even with a token. You should try to come, Liam. He was rendered invisible, an irrelevant spectator to their grand plans. It was Clara who delivered the final thoughtless blow. She turned to him, her face bright with excitement about the trip, and said, It's a shame you can't get that much time away from your work, honey. Then Marcus, with his unerring instinct for cruelty, delivered the punchline. Hey, I've got an idea. Liam can house sit, he crowed, slapping the table. Make sure no one steals the silver, Richard roared with laughter. Eleanor tittered delicately behind her hand, and Clara laughed. It wasn't a loud laugh, but a short, sharp burst of amusement. It was the most honest sound she had made all night, and it cut Liam more deeply than Richard's most calculated insult. In that single shared laugh, he saw the finality of their union. He was the court jester in the tragedy of his own marriage. He smiled back, a placid, empty expression. That sounds like a wonderful trip for you all, he said. I hope you have a lovely time. His politeness was a foreign language they could not comprehend. They heard weakness. He meant it as a farewell. The days that followed the dinner were quiet. Liam moved through his life with a deliberate, focused calm. The lockout from the joint account was the formal declaration of war, but the battle plan had been drawn up in his mind long before. His response would not be emotional or reactive. It would be architectural. He would deconstruct their world, brick by brick, exposing the faulty foundation and the rotten beams until the entire structure collapsed under the weight of its own arrogance. His office was the antithesis of his in-laws' opulent mansion. It was a clean, minimalist space in a converted warehouse downtown, a part of the city Richard Maxwell considered gritty and undesirable. The walls were white. The furniture was a collection of classic Eames and Le Corbusier pieces, and one entire wall was a sheet of glass overlooking the industrial canal. There were no gold fixtures, no heavy drapery. The only luxury was light and space. Here, Liam was not the person his wife's family saw. Here, he was himself. On a massive central table, where Richard imagined he drew kitchen extensions, lay the 1 to 500 scale model of a breathtaking skyscraper. It was a twisting, crystalline structure that seemed to defy gravity, its form both elegant and powerful. It was the Phoenix Tower. His Phoenix Tower. He had been developing the concept for 2 years, working directly with the project's primary investor, a man who valued discretion and genius above all else. Richard Maxwell hadn't been in talks with SOM or Foster and Partners. Those were lies he told to impress people. He had been desperately trying to get a meeting with the legendary enigmatic head of the Helios Design Group, the boutique firm Liam had founded under a pseudonym a decade ago. Liam ran a hand over the cool, smooth surface of the model. He had poured his soul into this building. It was designed to be a symbol of genuine renewal, a beacon of sustainable, forward-thinking architecture. To hear it co-opted by Richard as a monument to his own ego felt like a profanation. He moved to his desk and made a phone call. Not to a divorce lawyer, not yet. He called his financial manager, a quiet, unflappable woman named Anya Sharma, who managed the labyrinthine structure of his actual wealth. "Anya, it's Liam," he said, his voice low. "Liam, I saw the flag on the joint household account. I assume this is proceeding as we discussed." Her voice was calm, professional. She was accustomed to his preference for strategic patience. "Yes," he confirmed. "It's time. I want you to begin the transfer of all assets from the Maxwell Support Trust back to the primary holding company, effective immediately." "All assets?" she queried, a hint of question in her tone. "That includes the subsidy payments to Maxwell Industries, especially those," Liam said. The Maxwell Support Trust was an entity he had created 5 years prior, shortly after his marriage to Clara. He had wanted to help her father, whose company, even then, was showing signs of instability. He had funneled money into it anonymously, a silent partner propping up the business, while Richard took all the credit, oblivious to the source of his good fortune. It was meant as a gift, an act of love for his wife. Now, it had become a liability. "And the title for the Elm Street property?" Anya asked. Liam's breath caught for a second. The Elm Street property was the grand mansion Richard and Eleanor lived in. He had bought it for them through the same trust as a wedding gift to Clara, a gesture he thought would secure her parents' future and earn their respect. It had accomplished the former, but spectacularly failed at the latter. "Yes," he said, his voice harder now. "Transfer the title as well. I want everything consolidated under my personal control by the end of the month." "Consider it done, Liam," Anya said. "The paperwork is already prepared." After the call, he sat in the silence of his office, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the floor. He opened the worn leather portfolio he always carried. Inside, beneath a sheaf of sketches of the tower, were the documents Anya had referred to: the original deed for the Elm Street house, the charter for the Maxwell Support Trust, and the detailed accounting of every dollar he had poured into his father-in-law's failing enterprise. He had been carrying the proof of their dependence for years, a quiet, heavy burden. He picked up a framed photograph from the corner of his desk. It was of him and Clara, taken on their honeymoon in a small coastal town in Italy. They were laughing, their faces pressed close together, the sun in their eyes. She looked at him with an unguarded adoration that made his chest ache. Where had that woman gone? Had he, in his attempt to shield her from the complexities of his success, inadvertently starved the respect she needed to feel for him? Had his quietness been a mistake? He had built a fortress of wealth to protect them, but he had lived outside the walls, hoping she would join him. Instead, she had stayed inside the castle with her family, and eventually come to see him as an outsider. A profound sadness washed over him. Deeper than anger, this wasn't a victory. It was a tragedy. He was a man who built things, beautiful, lasting things meant to inspire. Now he was being forced to become a man who dismantled them. He placed the photograph face down on his desk. The time for sentiment was over. The quiet before the storm had passed. Now the wind was beginning to blow. Weeks turned into a month. Life settled into a new, strange rhythm. Clara, emboldened by her father's praise and her perceived control, treated Liam with a cloying maternal condescension. She had established a small, separate bank account into which she deposited a meager weekly allowance for him. Enough for gas and groceries, she'd explained, as if speaking to a teenager. She would ask for receipts, scrutinizing his small purchases with an air of grave responsibility. The irony was so thick he could taste it. While she was monitoring his spending on coffee and sandwiches, he was liquidating trusts worth tens of millions of dollars. Her family's arrogance, meanwhile, inflated to magnificent proportions. Richard had, through sheer bluster and a string of fortunate coincidences Liam had secretly orchestrated years ago, managed to secure the primary contracts for the Phoenix Tower development. He didn't know he was negotiating with his son-in-law's proxy. He thought he was outsmarting the competition. He paraded his success like a trophy, becoming even more insufferable. The culmination of this self-congratulatory fever was the party. Eleanor had been planning it for weeks. It was to be a grand affair at the Elm Street estate to officially announce the launch of the Phoenix Tower project and celebrate Richard's deal of a lifetime. It was to be their coronation, the moment the Maxwell family ascended to the highest echelon of the city's elite. Clara presented the invitation to Liam one evening as he was reading in the living room of their shared house, a house he owned, a fact she remained blissfully unaware of. The invitation was thick, cream-colored cardstock, the text embossed in gold leaf. It was a monument to ostentatious taste. "The invitations came today," she said, her voice bright and brittle. She handed it to him. "Isn't it gorgeous?" Liam took it, his fingers tracing the raised lettering. "To celebrate the triumph of Maxwell Industries," he read aloud, his voice devoid of inflection. "Daddy is ecstatic. This solidifies his legacy," Clara said, watching his face for a reaction. She wanted him to feel small. She wanted him to feel the sting of his own insignificance in the face of her family's monumental success. "You should come, Liam," she continued, her tone dripping with false magnanimity. "It's important to network. You never know, you might meet someone who can offer you a small job. A consultation, perhaps." There it was, the peak of her condescension, the final pathetic attempt to establish her dominance. He looked up from the invitation and met her eyes. He saw the triumphant gleam, the certainty that she had finally put him in his place. He felt a surge of pity for her. She was so blinded by the glittering reflection of her father's supposed success that she couldn't see the abyss opening up beneath her feet. He gave her a small, gentle smile. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," he said. His quiet agreement seemed to unnerve her more than any protest would have. She had expected him to be sullen, to refuse, to give her another reason to lecture him on his lack of support. His simple acceptance left her with nothing to say. She just stood there for a moment, a flicker of confusion in her eyes, before turning and walking away. The day of the party, Liam prepared himself as a soldier prepares for battle. He chose his suit with care. Not a flashy designer label, but a bespoke piece of quiet, perfect tailoring in a dark charcoal wool. It was a suit that didn't shout. It spoke in a confident, authoritative whisper. It was the armor of a man who needed no external validation. An hour before he was due to leave for the party, he had one final meeting. He sat in a quiet corner of a discreet hotel bar, a glass of sparkling water in front of him. A man approached his table. He was older, with a mane of silver hair and eyes that held the calm, piercing intelligence of a man who commanded empires. This was James Sterling, the billionaire industrialist, philanthropist, and the primary financial backer of the Phoenix Tower. He was a man Richard Maxwell dreamed of meeting, a figure whose name was spoken in hushed, reverent tones in the boardrooms of the city. He was also Liam's mentor, client, and friend of 15 years. "Liam," Sterling said, his voice a low rumble. He extended a hand. "Everything is in position." Liam shook his hand. "Thank you for coming, James. I appreciate you doing this." "Nonsense," Sterling waved a hand. "I've been watching what Richard Maxwell has been doing to your reputation and to my project for months. Frankly, his arrogance is a liability. And what his family has put you through, it's a disgrace. Patience is a virtue, Liam, but there comes a time when the bill must be presented." "The bill is ready," Liam said, tapping the leather portfolio that sat on the seat beside him. Sterling nodded, a thin, satisfied smile on his face. "The final parcel of land, the one Maxwell thinks he acquired last week. Northwood Holdings?" "He believes he bought it out from under a competitor for a bargain," Liam confirmed. "He'll be surprised to learn who the sole proprietor of Northwood Holdings is," Sterling chuckled. "You've set the stage perfectly. A public triumph, followed by a public reckoning. It's almost Shakespearean." "I'd have preferred a quiet conversation," Liam admitted, a note of weariness in his voice. "But they don't listen to quiet conversations." "No," Sterling agreed, his expression turning serious. "They don't. Some people only learn by fire. Go, end it. I will be there shortly to observe the fireworks." James Sterling stood, gave Liam a firm nod, and was gone. Liam sat for another moment, gathering his thoughts. The chess pieces were all in place, the board was set. He was about to walk into the heart of his enemy's fortress, not as a prisoner, but as the king who had been in disguise all along. He picked up his portfolio, stood, and walked out of the bar, a man on his way to his own coronation and their dethronement. The Maxwell estate was ablaze with light, a beacon of hubris against the dark night sky. Valets in crisp uniforms scurried to park a river of luxury cars. Music and laughter spilled from the open doors. Liam bypassed the valet, parking his own modest but elegant sedan in a discreet spot down the road. He preferred to walk the final 100 yards, the crunch of gravel under his shoes a steadying rhythm. He moved through the throng of guests, a ghost in their midst. He was a study in quiet contrast to the loud colors, loud jewelry, and loud voices that filled the air. They were all performing, vying for attention. He was simply observing. He saw Clara near the grand staircase, a vision in a glittering emerald gown. She was laughing with a group of people, her hand on her father's arm. She radiated a brittle, triumphant energy. She caught his eye across the room, and her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He gave a slight, polite nod and continued his slow, deliberate path toward the back of the garden, where a large marquee had been erected. Inside the marquee, a makeshift stage was set up in front of a massive projection screen. Richard was in his element, glad-handing politicians, bankers, and socialites. He was a king holding court, and this party was his victory parade. He spotted Liam hovering at the edge of the crowd and strode over, a proprietary hand landing on his shoulder. "Liam, glad you could make it," he boomed, his voice thick with magnanimity. "See? This is what real success looks like. Take it all in. Maybe it'll inspire you." He gestured around the tent, at the champagne fountain, the oyster bar, the string quartet. "It's quite a celebration, Richard," Liam said, his voice even. "You're damn right it is," Richard laughed. "This is just the beginning. The Phoenix Tower will put the Maxwell name on the map forever." He gave Liam's shoulder a final condescending pat and moved on, eager to receive more adulation. Liam found a quiet spot near the back, his leather portfolio held loosely in one hand. He waited. He was an architect. He understood the importance of timing, of letting the structure settle before applying the final transformative element. The crowd's chatter began to dim as Richard mounted the stage, tapping a microphone. A hush fell. "Friends, colleagues, family," Richard began, his arms spread wide. "Welcome. Tonight, we don't just celebrate a business deal. We celebrate a vision for the future of this great city." Behind him, the large screen flickered to life, showing a dramatic, computer-generated rendering of a skyscraper. It was a good rendering, but it was a soulless one. It captured the shape of Liam's design, but none of its spirit. It was a hollow echo. "Tonight," Richard continued, his voice ringing with manufactured passion, "I am proud to officially announce the Phoenix Tower." Polite, enthusiastic applause filled the tent. Richard beamed, soaking it in. He launched into a rambling speech, thanking his team, his financial partners, none of whom were present, and his family. He spoke of legacy, of grit, of his infallible business instincts. "Building something of this magnitude is like a war," he declared. "You fight for every inch. Just last week, we secured the final critical piece of the puzzle. A parcel of land owned by a stubborn little holding company. My competitors were circling, but we outmaneuvered them. We got the land for a song." He paused for effect, letting the story of his cunning sink in. "I personally closed the deal to acquire Northwood Holdings, and with it, the future of downtown." He looked out across the crowd, his eyes scanning for Liam. He found him, and a smug, pitying smile crossed his face. It was a look that said, "This is how a real man provides for my daughter." It was at that precise moment that the atmosphere in the tent shifted. A murmur rippled through the crowd, starting from the entrance. The sea of guests parted, creating a path. James Sterling had arrived. The effect was instantaneous. Sterling was the sun, and everyone else in the room was a planet suddenly caught in his gravitational pull. His presence was an immediate indictment of Richard's performance. Richard was playing at being a king. Sterling simply was one. Richard's speech faltered. He stared, momentarily dumbfounded, as Sterling, flanked by two associates, entered the marquee. "Mr. Sterling, Richard finally managed, scrambling down from the stage. What an honor. I had no idea you were coming. He scurried over, his hand extended, his face a mask of fawning obsequiousness. But Sterling's eyes weren't on Richard. They swept the room, calm and assessing, until they landed on the quiet figure at the back. Bypassing Richard's outstretched hand as if it didn't exist, James Sterling walked directly toward Liam. The entire party held its breath, watching this inexplicable event unfold. The king was walking past the court jester to greet a servant. It made no sense. Sterling stopped in front of Liam. A warm, genuine smile lit up his face. "Liam," he said, his voice resonating in the sudden, profound silence. "Good to see you. I trust everything is in order?" The question hung in the air, a quiet bomb that had just been armed. Richard, Clara, Eleanor, and Marcus watched, their faces a collage of utter confusion. Richard hurried after Sterling, his earlier bravado completely gone, replaced by a desperate bewilderment. "James, Mr. Sterling, you two, you know each other?" Richard stammered, looking back and forth between the titan of industry and his supposedly insignificant son-in-law. Sterling turned his head slowly to look at Richard, his expression one of mild amusement, as if observing a curious insect. "Know him," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent marquee. "Richard, I've known Liam for 15 years. He's been my private design partner for the last decade." A collective gasp went through the room. Clara's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. Richard's face went pale. Sterling wasn't finished. He gestured with his chin toward the screen behind the stage, where the soulless rendering of the tower still glowed. "Liam isn't just a partner. Liam is the architect of the Phoenix Tower. It's his design, his vision." He let that statement settle, a second, more powerful shockwave. Then he delivered the coup de grace. "Furthermore," he said, his gaze locking onto Richard's, "he is the sole owner and proprietor of Northwood Holdings." The silence in the tent was no longer just quiet. It was absolute. It was the silence of a universe being unmade. "You didn't buy Northwood Holdings from a competitor," Richard, Sterling continued, his voice cold and precise. "You bought it from a shell corporation that Liam himself controls. He didn't sell it to you. He allowed you to acquire the development rights as part of a complex financing structure that he and he alone designed and approved." The world tilted on its axis. The foundation of Richard Maxwell's triumph, the very bedrock of this celebration, cracked and then disintegrated into nothing. He hadn't been a conqueror. He had been a pawn, moved into place by the very man he had spent years despising and belittling. Liam watched the comprehension dawn on their faces, the shock, the denial, the dawning, sickening horror. He saw it in Richard's ashen face, in Eleanor's trembling hand, in Marcus's slack-jawed stupor. Most of all, he saw it in Clara's eyes. She stared at him as if he were a complete stranger, a man she had never met. In a way, he was. He stepped forward, his portfolio held in his hand. The quiet servant was finally taking center stage. "And that," Liam said, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable weight of authority, "brings me to a few other points that need clarification." The first bomb had been Sterling's. The next would be his own. Liam took a step forward, into the center of the invisible circle of shocked silence that surrounded his family. He felt no triumph, only a great and terrible sadness. This was not a celebration. It was a vivisection, a necessary but brutal act of exposing the truth. He looked at Richard, who was swaying slightly, his face the color of old parchment. "For 3 years," Liam began, his voice not loud, but perfectly clear, resonating with the quiet authority he had held in reserve for so long. "For 3 years, I have come to your home. I have eaten at your table, and I have listened." He paused, letting the weight of that single word, listened, sink in. This was his list of grievances, not delivered in anger, but as a calm, factual accounting. "I listened when you, Eleanor, dismissed a gift I brought as something for the kitchen staff. I listened, Marcus, when you joked that I should house sit while you vacationed in Tuscany, a trip I could have bought for all of you 10 times over without noticing the expense." His gaze shifted to Marcus, who flinched as if struck. "I listened, Richard," he continued, his eyes locking with his father-in-law's, as you lectured me on the nature of success, as you told me I was in a different league, as you boasted about your infallible instincts, all while my money, anonymously and consistently, was the only thing keeping Maxwell Industries from collapsing into bankruptcy. Another shockwave hit the room. Whispers erupted like wildfire. Richard's business partners, the bankers, the politicians, they all looked at him with new calculating eyes. The king was not just naked. He had never even owned the clothes. "And you, Clara?" Liam said, his voice softening with a deep, profound sorrow. He turned to his wife. She stood frozen, her face a mask of anguish. "You sat there through all of it. You let them. You chose them. When your brother made his joke, a joke about my worth and my place in our life, you left. It was a small sound, but it was the loudest thing I have ever heard." Tears were streaming down Clara's face now, silent, hot tears of shame and dawning comprehension. "Liam, I didn't know," she whispered, the words lost in the cavernous silence. "No," he agreed gently. "You didn't know. That was my mistake. I thought I was protecting you, protecting us, from the pressures and complications of wealth. I built a world for us where I thought we could be equals, where our success would be shared, built together from the ground up. I wanted you to love me for who I was, not for what I had. But I failed. I failed to understand that you and your family don't measure a person's worth by their character or their integrity or their love. You measure it by the number in their bank account." He fell silent for a moment, the quiet indictment hanging in the air, more damning than any shout. Then he opened the leather portfolio. He did not pull out blueprints or sketches. He pulled out a single crisp legal document. "This," he said, holding it up for all to see, "is the deed to this house, this land, this monument to your success." He walked slowly to a nearby table, the crowd parting before him as if he were a biblical prophet. He laid the document down, smoothing it with his hand. "Richard, you didn't buy this property. You couldn't afford it. Not then, not now. I bought it 5 years ago. It was a wedding gift for my wife." He looked at Clara. "I put it in a trust, the same trust I used to prop up your father's business. A trust that I, and I alone, control. Or rather," he corrected himself, his voice dropping into an almost gentle register, "that I did control." He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a simple, elegant fountain pen. With a deliberate, unhurried motion, he clicked the cap off and signed the bottom of the document. "As of this morning," he announced, his voice regaining its strength, "the Maxwell Support Trust was dissolved. All its assets have been liquidated or transferred into my name. That includes the outstanding loans to Maxwell Industries, which are now due, in full, immediately. It includes the ownership of your corporate headquarters, which I will be leasing back to you at market rate, assuming you can pay, and it includes this house." He looked up, his gaze sweeping over the horrified faces of the Maxwell family. "You are standing in my house. You are drinking my champagne, and you are celebrating a triumph that was never yours." He capped the pen with a soft, final click. "The party is over." The aftermath was not an explosion, but an implosion. The magnificent facade of the Maxwell family collapsed inward, leaving a gaping void. The silence in the tent stretched for an agonizing 10 seconds, then broke into a cacophony of hushed, frantic whispers as guests began to back away, creating a wide circle around the wreckage of the family. They were radioactive. No one wanted to be caught in the fallout. Richard was the first to break. The color had drained from his face, leaving it a pasty, slack-jawed mask of terror. He took a stumbling step forward. "No," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "No, that's a lie. It's a trick." He looked around wildly, seeking an ally, a friendly face, but found only averted eyes and cold, appraising stares. The men who had been clapping him on the back minutes earlier were now looking at him like a bad investment. Eleanor let out a small, wounded sound, like a deflating balloon. She sank into a nearby chair, her hand pressed to her chest, her carefully constructed world of social supremacy shattering around her. Marcus just stood there, speechless, his mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish gasping for air. But it was Clara who Liam watched. She was the epicenter of his decision, The reason for this public demolition. She stared at him, her eyes wide, with a terrifying, all-encompassing comprehension. The past 3 years of her life replayed in her mind, but this time viewed through a new, brutally honest lens. Every condescending word she had spoken, every time she had sided with her family against him, every moment of her smug superiority, it was all cast in the horrifying light of the truth. He hadn't been a failure she needed to manage. He had been a titan holding up her world, and she had been chipping away at his hands with a tiny hammer. The account, she finally choked out, the words barely audible. The joint account, The joint account, Clara? Liam asked, his voice devoid of malice, filled only with a profound, aching sadness. That was our grocery money, our gas money, our movie ticket money. I put my consulting salary in there, and only that because I wanted us to live a normal life. My actual income, the money from Helios Group, has never once passed through an account you had access to. I never lied to you. I just never told you the whole truth. I was waiting for you to see me, not the balance sheet. He took a step toward her, his gaze softening. You locked me out of our household budget and celebrated it as a victory. You stood by and let your family mock the man who was quietly, single-handedly, keeping them from utter ruin. Do you understand that, Clara? Do you understand what you did? This was the moment of truth. The choice laid bare. He wasn't asking for an apology. He was asking for recognition. For her to see the chasm that had opened between them. A chasm of her own making. The pleading began then. It started with Richard, who seemed to snap out of his stupor. His survival instinct kicking in, he rushed forward, his face contorted in a desperate, ugly mask of panic. Liam, son, we can talk about this, he begged, reaching for Liam's arm. Liam stepped back, and Richard's hand fell into empty space. There's been a misunderstanding. A terrible misunderstanding. We had no idea. That's the point, Richard, Liam said calmly. You had no idea. You never bothered to ask. You never bothered to look. You just assumed. Clara finally found her voice, a raw, desperate sob tearing from her throat. Liam, please, she cried, stumbling toward him, tears carving paths through her perfect makeup. I'm sorry. God, I am so sorry. I love you. Please don't do this. She reached for him, her hands grasping at his suit jacket. For a moment, he stood still, letting her hold on. A flicker of the old affection warring with the new, hard reality. He looked down at her, at the woman he had loved, the woman he had built a life for. I believe that you're sorry now, Clara, he said, his voice gentle but firm. But are you sorry for what you did, or are you sorry for the consequences? Are you sorry you hurt me, or are you sorry that the money is gone? He gently detached her hands from his jacket. It was not a rejection, but a boundary, a final necessary line. Our marriage, the one we had, is over, he stated, not as a threat, but as a simple, painful fact. It was built on a foundation of lies, my lies of omission and your family's lies of superiority. That foundation is gone now. What comes next? I don't know, but it cannot be this. He turned and looked at James Sterling, who gave him a slow, approving nod. He had done what he came to do. He turned back, gave one last lingering look at the ruins of the Maxwell family, and then walked away. He didn't look back. He walked out of the tent, past the stunned guests, across the manicured lawn of the house he now owned, and into the quiet darkness, leaving the deafening sound of their world collapsing behind him. The months that followed were a study in consequence. Liam was not a vindictive man. His goal had not been to destroy the Maxwells, but to force them to live in the truth. The demolition had been precise, surgical. He did not cast them into poverty, but into reality, which for them was a far harsher sentence. Maxwell Industries was the first to fall. With Liam's loans called in and the truth of its precarious finances laid bare, the company became insolvent within weeks. James Sterling, as a gesture to Liam, stepped in. He didn't save it. He dismantled it, absorbing its few viable assets into one of his own subsidiary companies and dissolving the rest. Richard Maxwell, the self-proclaimed titan, was a CEO with no company to lead. He was forced into a quiet, early retirement, his legacy not a skyscraper, but a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms across the city. The grand estate on Elm Street was sold. Liam had no desire to live there. It was tainted by too many bitter memories. He put the proceeds from the sale into a new, much smaller trust, one managed by an independent third party. It provided Richard and Eleanor with enough for a comfortable, upper-middle-class life, a nice house in a respectable suburb, a decent car, enough to live without worry. But the life of opulent parties, European vacations, and casual cruelty was over. They were forced to live within the bounds of a reality they had long pretended to be above. Eleanor, stripped of her social standing, withered. Richard, stripped of his power, seemed to shrink, becoming a quiet, bitter old man. Marcus, for the first time in his 30 years, had to get a real job. With the family name now a liability rather than an asset, he found the doors that had always been open to him were suddenly, firmly closed. He ended up in a mid-level sales position at a logistics company, a job that required him to be polite, to work hard, and to answer to others. The adjustment was brutal, and Clara was the most complex part of the fallout. She refused to live with her parents, unable to bear their recriminations and shared misery. She also refused the generous settlement Liam offered her. In a surprising act of penance, she moved into a small, modest apartment downtown, found a job at an art gallery, and began the slow, painful work of dismantling her own identity. She started therapy. She and Liam began to meet for coffee. Once every few weeks, the first few meetings were excruciating. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, with shame and with grief for the marriage they had lost. Clara did not ask for forgiveness. She did not ask for him back. She asked questions. She wanted to understand. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" she asked one rainy afternoon, staring into her cup. "About the money? About your work?" Liam considered the question for a long time. "Because I was afraid," he admitted, the confession costing him something. "I was afraid it would change things. I saw how your family was about money, and I wanted us to have something separate from that. I wanted you to be with me, not with Helios Design Group. I wanted to build a life on a real foundation. But you didn't trust me," she said, her voice quiet. It wasn't an accusation, but a realization. "You didn't trust me to be able to handle it, to be a partner." "No," he said, the single word heavy with regret. "I didn't, and I was wrong. But you, Clara, you didn't trust me either. You chose to believe the worst version of me, the one your family created. We both failed. There was no easy reunion, no tearful reconciliation that wiped the slate clean. The trust between them had been shattered too completely. But in those quiet, difficult conversations, something new was being built. Not a marriage, not yet, perhaps not ever, but a fragile, tentative bridge of understanding. He saw a woman struggling to shed the skin of her upbringing, to find a core of self-worth that wasn't tied to wealth or status. She saw a man burdened by his own quiet strength, a man who had made mistakes out of love and fear. One crisp autumn day, Liam stood at the base of a rising giant of steel and glass. The Phoenix Tower was taking shape, climbing into the sky with breathtaking speed. It was even more beautiful than the models. His design, his vision, was becoming real, a testament to what could be built on a true foundation. He watched the workers moving with practiced efficiency, the welders' sparks like fleeting stars against the concrete core. He was no longer hiding. The world knew he was the architect, the genius behind Helios. The accolades and offers poured in, but he greeted them with the same quiet calm he had always possessed. The external noise didn't matter. The work mattered. He thought about the life he had tried to build with Clara, a small, perfect structure that had collapsed. And he looked up at the tower, a structure built to withstand any storm. He realized that true strength wasn't about hiding or protecting. It was about being authentic, about building your life and your relationships in the clear, honest light of day. He had learned that lesson at a great cost. He felt a sense of peace settle over him. He was sad for what he had lost, for the love that had curdled into resentment and shame. But he was not broken. He was an architect. He knew that sometimes a structure must be completely demolished before something stronger and more beautiful can be built in its place. He turned away from the rising tower, the symbol of his public success, and walked back into the heart of the city, his face toward the future. He was a man finally at peace with his own power, a man free to live without pretense, ready to build again. True worth is not measured by the size of your bank account or the opulence of your home. It's measured by your integrity, by the respect you give, and the trust you earn. It's about building a life on a foundation of character, not currency. The Maxwells learned that lesson the hard way. They mistook silence for weakness and humility for failure, and in the end, their world built on arrogance was brought down by a quiet truth. What do you think is the most important foundation for a relationship? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you found this story meaningful, please give it a like and subscribe for more tales of justice and redemption. Until next time, remember to build your life on solid ground.